So what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Colton Posey Fishing. Today we're going to be talking about boat docks. So one of the biggest things, oh man, sorry about the laughter. As soon as I mention boat docks, the first thing that comes in my mind is James Watson. But you know, he's the master at fishing boat docks, by the way. But you know, talking about fishing boat docks, one of the biggest things is if you're on a lake like I am today, Lewis Smith Lake, there is tons. And I mean tons of boat docks, and it can be really overwhelming. And sometimes there's not necessarily this pattern of, you know, these specific boat docks or what I'm catching fish off of. There typically becomes a pattern when you're fishing boat docks of the area that you're catching those fish off of under those boat docks. So we're going to break down how I figure out patterns when I'm fishing boat docks. So stay tuned. This is something you don't want to miss. All right, everybody, you know the deal. If the video helps you at all, make sure to hit that thumbs up button. Also, subscribe down below. I got you covered every week when it comes to bass fishing. Also, comment if you have any questions, anything you want to add, or you just want to talk fishing. I love hearing from you guys. So during the summer, one of the most productive bites that you can get on is actually fishing docks. Now, you may have a couple different kinds of docks in your lake. You have the floating docks, which have, you know, the black buoys under them. There's no poles or anything like that going in the ground. They usually have a cable on the back. And then you also have your pole docks, your set-in docks, the docks that have poles going into the ground. Those are typically going to be on your river systems. Now, some people will say that, you know, your floating docks are typically more productive, and some people will say like your set-in docks, the pole docks, that are stable in the water are more productive. But I found it kind of really depends on the time of year. So like during the spawn, like the spring and stuff like that, typically I catch more fish off my pole docks, the set docks. I don't know if the fish are spawning up against them or what the case may be, but it seems like they really like those stable docks. One of the things that I've always found that if you have a really long period of rain, and then, you know, kind of like that little drought spell, long period of rain, that drought spell where the water's just constantly going up and down, those are typically not the times that I want to fish those pole docks. If I have stable weather conditions for a while, a week or two, then, you know, that's typically when I'm gonna, you know, test the waters on the pole docks compared to the floating docks. Now, on the flip side, if you have a lot of rising and lowering of the water in your lake or your river system, then typically the floating docks seem to be a lot more productive. I think that shade line just doesn't move as much, and it's a lot more stable, I guess you could say, under that boat dock. There's, you know, they've got places, I guess you could say, where they can go. I don't really know, but there is certain times like that where I notice the bite is a lot better on floating docks than it is set-in docks. One of the other things that I can kind of tell, like if I'm in the right area fishing these docks, is like when I'm running that spinner bait, or when I'm running that swim jig or that bladed jig or fluke or whatever the case may be up under these docks. I notice a lot of times if I'm going to be close to fish, I will typically see shad following those baits or herring. Then those are the areas that I can focus on around the lake. If it's at the mouth of the creek, then when I go to fish, you know, the typical boat docks throughout my lake, I'm going to stay closer to the mouths of the creeks and stuff like that, or towards the main lake. It could be either way, you know, it just depends on what time of year it is. But definitely during the summer, that's one of the easiest bites I guess you could get on, per se. When they push up under them and they're active, they typically like to hang out in those super shady spots. Now, if you're fishing a deep lake, you know, like I'm out here on Lewis Smith today, you know, there's areas under these boat docks where it's 80 to 100 feet. So, you know, I'm not going to be dropping a jig 100 feet because there's not going to be any fish there. But typically those fish will stay, you know, 5 to 10 foot below the dock, or sometimes they'll be right up against the bottom of the dock. Every one of the products that I use, the boat wash, the all-purpose cleaner, the musket especially, comes in big handy. I think it's a great product as far as, you know, just for what I need, keeping everything nice, tidy, and clean, and doing it in a, you know, a quick, efficient way, right? Because I mean, I don't want to get home from being on the water for, you know, 12, 13 hours and then, you know, have to spend 2 more hours just cleaning up everything. So it, you know, it just made everything a lot quicker, a lot more efficient. The eco-friendly parts really got me, got a thumbs up for me, especially simply because I want to keep our outdoors clean because that's how I make my living. That's how, you know, me and my family enjoy our spare time also. So guys, I gotta say, I'm Colton with Colton Posey Fishing, and I highly suggest the Salty Captive products to keep my stuff clean. So being able to identify, you know, what type of bait that I can use as a tool to keep that bait closer up in the water column over that deeper water is going to be a huge factor. And a lot of times those boat docks create kind of like an area you would typically want to fish. So, you know, if I'm looking at my contour map, I'm gonna explain what I mean. If you're looking at your contour map and you see a point and it's during the summer or during the winter or something like that, then you typically look at that and you say, I'm going to fish that point. There should be fish on that point. I use boat docks very, very similar. So, you know, if I have a boat dock that sticks out further than the rest or something like that, that's typically going to indicate to me that there should be some fish. It's something different in an area where there should be fish. So a lot of times they'll push up under those areas. It's just like during the fall, you know, it's really hard to pass by isolated cover during the fall because a lot of times these bait fish and stuff will congregate around that isolated cover. Now, when it comes to shade cover, one of the biggest things is getting to those hard to reach places. You're trying to put your bait in an area where a lot of anglers can't get to. So one of the biggest things you can learn to do is skip your baits. Now, if you're going to learn to skip your bait, one of the biggest mistakes that I see anglers do, they're putting everything they can into that bait. When they go to throw it, their whole arm, their shoulder, their waist, everything. They're putting everything behind it, kind of like they're throwing a hook or swinging a baseball bat. But one of the easiest things you can do is roll your wrist. You're gonna roll and flick your wrist, and you're trying to keep that bait right above the surface of the water. Now, I don't suggest trying to learn right away on a bait caster because it's very, very easy to backlash, and you're going to be picking backlashes out all day. You'll be frustrated, the whole 9 yards. One of the easiest things you can do is go out on a very, very calm day and just say, I'm going to fish docks, and I'm going to pick up a spinning rod with a wacky rig that's weightless, and I'm going to learn to skip that and just practice that. And I guarantee you, if you practice that for 3 to 4 hours, you will be skipping in no time. Once you get that down, move up to your bait caster, but I typically suggest throwing like a 1/4 ounce swim bait, something that's not super heavy, something that's not super light. So I like throwing a 1/4 ounce swim bait head, but I like throwing like a 3.75 inch raid swimmer on that because it's not too big, but it's not too small. And at the same time, you have a lot of control over that bait, and you can learn to skip with that, and then you can kind of mimic that with other baits, whether that's football jigs, casting jigs, swim jigs, spinner baits, buzz baits, the whole 9 yards. Another mistake I see anglers do when they're fishing boat docks, and this can be very, very difficult if there's a lot of boat traffic or if there's a lot of wind. If you've got a lot of disturbance on the surface of the water, it's about impossible to skip your baits. So don't be trying to do that, especially to begin with. You know, practice when you can, and I promise you'll get a lot better at it, but pay very, very close attention to oddball docks, docks that are sticking further out, docks that are pushed further in, docks that are over deep water compared to the docks around it that's under shallow water. Little stuff like that, you'll be able to key in on a bite a lot quicker, and you'll be able to mimic that all around your lake. So either way, guys, that's my breakdown of boat docks. If the video helps you at all, make sure to hit that thumbs up button. It helps me out a ton. Subscribe down below. I got you covered every week when it comes to bass fishing. Comment if you have any questions, anything you want to add, you can share with the community, help the community out, or if you just want to talk fishing. I love hearing from you guys. See you next time.